dive. Today we're taking a scalpel to one of the most polarizing figures in recent Ethiopian political history, Dr. Younus Birru.
Mm.
For the last 7 years or so, his political role has been defined by this really deep and honestly fascinating contradiction. And our sources today really push us to understand why.
And that contradiction is the core mission of this deep dive. I mean, on one hand, you have critics who accuse him of being a polished ideological amplifier for Amhara nationalism.
Right, a key voice providing a kind of intellectual cover for its specific partisan agenda.
Exactly. But on the other hand, he consistently frames his own actions as those of a principled technocrat, a policy expert whose public dissent was driven only by frustration with failing governance.
So our job here is to move past all the rhetoric and really map out the timeline. How did his journey intersect with the political agendas of, say, the Amhara Democratic Party, which later became the Amhara Prosperity Party?
And with that titanic struggle over Ethiopia's whole multinational constitutional order, this isn't just a biography. It's really a case study in how expertise gets, well, weaponized in these highly polarized environments.
Okay, so let's unpack this.
Right.
If he was this principled technocrat, how did he first align himself so closely with what seems to be a very particular ideological movement? Let's start there with the context of his entry pre-2019.
You have to. That era was a crucible for Ethiopian politics.
Right.
The Amhara Democratic Party, or ADP, was undergoing this significant, really rapid ideological transformation.
And the sources trace this shift back to somewhere specific?
They trace it directly back to the influence of diaspora networks, who were pushing a really fundamental critique of the entire state structure.
And what was that core critique they were pushing?
It was aimed squarely at the foundation of the modern Ethiopian state, the 1995 FDRE Constitution. ADP elites, influenced by these networks, began arguing very aggressively that the Constitution lacked legitimacy because, in their view, it was never endorsed by the Amhara people.
Okay, so that's not just some academic point about ratification procedures. That's a political grenade.
It is.
If you claim the Constitution is illegitimate, then the entire multinational federal system it established is, by extension, invalid.
Precisely. This critique was part of a major political project with really two objectives. First, as you said, delegitimizing the federal system itself, the system that granted autonomy to various ethnic regions.
And the second objective?
Second, and this is just as important, was undermining Oromo political consciousness, specifically the concept of Oromuma.
And for our listener, just to be clear, Oromuma is essentially the collective political, cultural, and historical identity of the Oromo people. It's often interpreted by its critics as a kind of exclusionary nationalism that threatens a unified Ethiopia.
A perfect summary. So by attacking the federal structure, they were simultaneously trying to contain Oromo political power. And this is a pivotal moment where Dr. Birru's unique skill set became so valuable to these ADP-aligned circles.
He wasn't needed as a party member, though, right?
No, not as a foot soldier or even a formal member. He was needed as an ideological intermediary.
What does that actually look like in practice? What is an ideological intermediary doing?
Well, he had this ability to articulate these deep-seated Ethiopianist centralization arguments. The idea that the country needs a strong central identity, not autonomous ethnic regions. But he could do it using what the sources call Western policy language.
Ah, so he's the translator.
Yes.
He takes the core, often really emotionally charged internal message, federalism is a mistake, Oromuma is a threat, and he filters it. He puts it into these respectable, non-threatening academic or policy terms that would actually resonate in, say, DC or London policy circles.
Exactly. He lent immediate credibility and academic weight to what was a profoundly partisan political position. It was intellectual heavy lifting for a very specific ideological project.
Okay. But to really get the complexity here, we have to look at how he sees himself, right? His own actions, especially his role in the Independent Economic Advisory Council, the IEAC.
Yes, this is absolutely where he establishes his principal technocrat persona.
So let's shift to that. His whole narrative is built on this commitment to independence. What specific claims did he make about joining the IEAC?
His account really emphasizes how difficult he made it for the government to recruit him. He claims he negotiated for 2 full years with major figures like Mamo Miretu and Girma Birru.
2 years is a long time.
A very long time. And here's the core of his claim. He says he absolutely refused to join unless the council was structured to be fully, completely independent from government control.
That sets a very high bar for personal integrity. So in his version of the story, why did he end up resigning just 5 months later?
He claims his conditions were immediately violated. He alleges that, shortly after the council was formed, some members started pushing to make it a government organ.
And for him, that was a red line.
That was the red line, a clear violation of his non-negotiable mandate. He resigned on the spot. He even claims the government begged him not to leave, and he made sure to publish 2 separate articles at the time, explaining and defending his principled decision to step down.
So in his own mind, he's the policy expert who refused to compromise his standards. He's the one who walked away from the halls of power the minute they tried to capture his expertise for political ends.
That is the narrative he successfully built.
Mm-hmm.
But this is precisely where our sources introduce the complicating factor, the parallel network.
Right.
Because despite this very public show of independence and the resignation, sources indicate a deep informal connection to specific political networks that ran at the same time as, and even beyond, his official role.
Okay, here's where it gets really, really interesting. Who are these senior figures he maintained these informal advisory relations with, and what does that tell us about his true alignment?
Well, the list provided by the sources, it reads like a who's who of senior government figures at the time, many of whom were also senior Amhara leaders. It points to a powerful ideological compatibility.
Like who, specifically?
It includes 𝓷𝓻𝓻𝓻𝓸𝓸𝓷𝓻, who is the Deputy PM and Foreign Minister, 𝓔𝓽𝓱𝓲𝓸𝓹𝓲𝓪, also a Foreign Minister, 𝓵𝓸𝓻 𝓔𝓽𝓱𝓲𝓸𝓹, who was the PM's Press Secretary, and 𝓵𝓚 𝓔𝓙𝓸𝓪𝓷𝓽, the same senior policy advisor he'd negotiated with for 2 years.
So the sources explicitly link this group through a shared worldview.
Yes, a mutual suspicion of the multinational federal structure and a strong resistance to what they saw as an Oromo-led political transformation. He was, in effect, informally advising the ideological opposition from within the government.
And this wasn't just theoretical chats over coffee, right?
Absolutely not. This was operational. The sources specifically note that Biru helped draft key diplomatic correspondence for both 𝓷𝓻𝓻𝓻𝓻. I mean, think about the gravity of that for a moment.
Yep.
Even while claiming strict independence, he was actively helping to shape Ethiopia's foreign policy communication at the highest levels for ministers whose ideologies aligned perfectly with the anti-federalist agenda he was amplifying in public.
That is a phenomenal amount of access for someone who just quit on principle. It means he wasn't really outside the tent at all.
He was just sitting in a different chair, a kind of ghost advisor, exercising influence without any of the accountability.
Which only deepens this perception of ideological allegiance. And that continued collaboration is maybe even more telling.
It is. It counters the narrative that he immediately became this pure anti-government campaigner after leaving the IEAC. The sources show the government continued to rely on him as a diplomatic asset well into 2020.
This is critical. So give us the specific examples of the government using him after his supposedly principled resignation.
We have concrete evidence. In November 2019, 𝓵𝓸𝓻 𝓔𝓽𝓱𝓲𝓸𝓹𝓲𝓪, the PM's press secretary, emailed him directly. She requested he prepare a, quote, formal analysis reviewing Ethiopia in a time of political transitions and reforms, specifically for international news agencies.
And he did it.
He contributed to that messaging, yes.
And 𝓵𝓚 𝓔𝓙𝓸𝓪𝓷𝓽 he kept asking too, right?
He did. In 2020, 𝓵𝓚 similarly requested he prepare analyses targeted at international audiences. But maybe the most dramatic example is from May 2020, during the height of the diplomatic crisis over the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, the GERD.
What happened then?
Biru claims he personally helped secure the involvement of the Reverend Jesse Jackson.
That's a huge claim to make in the middle of a major national security crisis. What did he actually do?
He says he personally drafted a crucial letter for Reverend Jackson that was addressed to the Congressional Black Caucus in the U.S. And the fact that the Prime Minister reportedly called him personally to thank him for that specific contribution, well, it illustrates a level of trust and operational collaboration that completely defies the label of a purely disgruntled independent outsider.
So this collaboration, you combine that with the informal advisory roles to senior Amhara leaders. It means he occupied this liminal space, that fascinating middle ground. Publicly, he's the policy martyr, but privately, he's a trusted insider, a resource for a specific faction of the ruling party, shaping its diplomatic messaging.
It creates the perfect ideological cover. He gets to keep the independence label while furthering the aims of the very network he's advising.
That duality makes a lot of sense when you look at his public rhetoric later on. So let's move to what he claims was the definitive turning point. The moment he finally became a full-throated critic, he says it was the Tigray conflict.
That's his account. He states he initially supported the military action, calling it a law enforcement operation. But he says he became heavily critical when, in his view, Prime Minister Abiy turned it into a civil war. That was his final ethical breaking point.
But when you actually analyze his public commentary from late 2020 onward, something very telling happens. His rhetoric didn't primarily target Abiy Ahmed or the federal government's handling of the war itself. Where did he shift his focus?
And that's the crucial insight into his function as an ideological instrument. His focus shifted away from direct criticism of the PM and toward one, fiercely attacking Oromo identity,
Okay.
and two, repeatedly portraying Oroma as a civilizational danger.
So attacking the Oromo and Oromama became a kind of safe, high-impact surrogate for criticizing Abiy.
It seems so.
You can do that without directly confronting the federal leadership, which was obviously dangerous and could lead to total marginalization.
Absolutely. And that line of critique aligned perfectly with the long-held narratives of Amhara Prosperity Party elites and the deep anti-federalist agenda of groups like NOMA, the National Movement of Amhara, who fundamentally reject the 1995 Constitution.
So by focusing on Oromuma, he was essentially providing intellectual fodder for this entire political ecosystem.
Yes. Whether it was intentional or not, his scholarly framed critiques provided what the sources call intellectual cover and legitimacy for the political project that he had been ideologically aligned with since 2018, delegitimizing the federal system and, frankly, demonizing Oromo political identity.
That's the inescapable conclusion when you synthesize all the evidence. His personal motive might be principled disappointment, but the measurable impact of his public work is that it strengthened the narratives of Amhara nationalism and the broader anti-Oromo messaging ecosystem.
He basically gave the intellectual vocabulary to the partisan political project.
So let's bring it all back. What does this all mean for that contradiction we started with? This deep dive reveals a really clear shift in his role over these last 7 years.
It does. We can define the first phase, maybe 2018 to 2020, as the technocratic collaborator. He was selective, influential, engaged in policy, navigating internal party factions, and assisting with international messaging, all while maintaining this policy expert facade.
But the second phase, from late 2020 onward, that's undeniably the ideological instrument.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
His public discourse became central to the anti-federalist cause, providing a powerful, academically respected voice in the campaign against multinational federalism and Oromo political identity.
His insistence on principled independence, it just can't erase the measurable long-term impact of his public rhetoric.
It can't. His scholarly framed writings have served as crucial ideological legitimacy for a political project long pursued by Ethiopianist and Amhara elites.
So the contradiction remains. He claims principled independence and technocratic purity, yet his public rhetoric serves a clear, deeply partisan agenda that aligns with one specific ideological camp. And this is precisely why so many people in the discourse perceive him not as a neutral expert, but as a committed ideologue.
And this raises a really important question, something for you to consider as you navigate the information flow today. In a world of intense political polarization, how often do highly educated individuals who genuinely perceive themselves as neutral experts end up becoming the most effective ideological tools for the specific political networks they advise?
When does expertise blur into ideology?
And how do you spot the difference? Something to keep in mind.